Yes.
Now I'm going to turn it over to you.
Do I have to hit OK?
Sounds good. Thank you.
I'm not looking at that screen. Do I have to hit OK?
No, Rabbi, you're all good. I mean, recording's good. And Devin, you just let people in if there's anybody else who needs to come in.
I'm sure there
Will
will be.
do.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and I will wish you guys a wonderful class.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Learn. So the guy's name is Learner.
All
Have a
right.
good evening, everybody.
You too.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Dave.
Dave.
Okay. Hang on. Hit admit because Christina is this new
Yeah, I
woman
got her.
coming. Okay, you take it. First, just catch up. How is everybody? I'm putting stuff in the chat. I don't know. Also, I don't want to. I know I sent things out a little late, but I want to know if anybody's gotten a chance to read things. Yes, no, maybe.
I have not.
Normally I would have, but with Leo sick, I did not get a chance
Okay.
yet,
All
but I
right,
will.
that's fine. All right. Synagogue and Christina, I don't have your email. That's why I don't have you on the make sure you send it to me and also to Devin, and Devin will Devin is the guy over there in the cowboy and the baseball cap, and we'll get you on the list. Let's see here. Christina, you are coming in a little late, but that's okay. Don't worry about it. Tonight, hit okay on that. Tonight's topic is biblical history and civilization. Okay, she sent it to me. All right, so I'll have to make sure to get that in there. And if you have a chance, Christina, send it to the office email address too, the rabbi at, but I'll transfer it. All right, 5 stages. We put it 5 stages over there. Who else we got? Well, Devin, is Jamie with you, Devin?
She's gonna be watching the recording. She's not feeling well and she's in bed
all
right
right. Okay, all right. Into chat. You guys in the mood for some humor first?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to show you that. And we're also going to test how, there's Sam and Emily. I'm going to test how this works. I've done it before. I'm going to share a YouTube video, and then I'm going to share some more serious video. But most important is I want to be able, for us to be able, hey guys, okay. So take everything that's in the chat. If you didn't see it already, such as like Joe or Christina maybe didn't, Christina, I will take your email and send it to myself. I can't have everything open at the same time, but I'm going to try. Compose. All right. Okay. Rob Halfon. Email. Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So anyway, this is just for fun because we're doing biblical civilization. And you'll have to watch with the subtitles for the sake of it, for the fun of it. But there is a group in Israel called they have a name, the troop has a name, but their comedy skits are called "The Jews Are Coming," like the Russians are coming, the British are coming, kind of thing. So it's nothing to do with, it's not bad, it's funny. And so all the actors are really well known in Israel, and so this is a skit. They do all these different skits. They do contemporary stuff as well, and this is a skit on Moses giving the 10 Commandments. Okay, let me turn it on and then.
רבותיי,
Okay.
אלה הדיברות שאתם צריכים לקיים.
Share screen.
שאלות?
שאתה אומר לא תישא את שם אדוני לשווא.
Okay.
אז לא הרגע אמרת את השם שלו?
Right. Okay. So beginning. So look at the. I'll see if I can make it really big.
רבותיי, אלה הדיברות שאתם צריכים לקיים. שאלות?
These are the commandments.
אומר לא תישא את שם אדוני לשווא. אז לא הרגע אמרת את השם שלו?
לא, אדוני זה לא השם שלו.
אז איך קוראים לו?
קוראים לו אדוני.
אז כן קוראים לו אדוני.
לא, זה לא השם שלו אדוני. השם שלו מתחיל ביוד ונגמר ביוספה. לא, נו.
יודה.
עזבו, לא חשוב, שאלה הבאה.
לא תחמוד אשת רעך. זה אומר שאסור אפילו לחשוב עליה?
נכון.
אפילו אם היא ממש
Can you
עבר?
all see it
גם
okay?
היא ממש שווה.
Yeah, okay.
ואם אני מסתכל עליה וכל הזמן אומר לעצמי, אל תחשוב עליה, אל תחשוב עליה. זה עכשיו שאני חושב עליה?
אני לא יודע, אני אברר לך את זה.
אבל תברר, כי אני לא רוצה ליפול פה על סתירה לוגית.
עוד שאלות.
זה בקשר לכבד את אביך ואת אמך.
נו, באמת.
ומה אם נניח אבא שלי רצח מישהו תוך כדי שהוא חושב על אשתו השווה של השכן?
צודק, אם זה המצב, אז אל תכבד. בסדר? עוד שאלות.
לגבי הלא תרצח.
מה לא ברור בלא תרצח? למה צריך להתווכח על כל דבר? לא תרצח, לא תרצח, מה לא ברור פה?
זה כולל
Don't kill, don't
חלקים,
kill.
כי אתה ביקשת שנמחה את זכרם. עכשיו, כשאני מוחה זכר, אז אני עושה את זה בעזרת רצח. אז אני מפספסת פה משהו.
צודקת, שימי את העמלקים בצד. לא תרצח, לא כולל עמלקים.
ופלישתים, כן, וחיטים,
והם הורים.
ויבוסים, וגרגסים.
אבל זה לא מה שאמרתי.
אבל אתה ביקשת מאיתנו שננקה את ארץ ישראל מכל ישויה.
שצריך לרצוח אותם.
אז מה נעשה איתם? נשלח אותם לשייט?
רבותיי, בסדר, הבנתי, לא תרצח למעט פלישתים, עמלקים, גרגסים, יבוסים, ומורים וחיטים.
ומצרים.
מה מצרים? מה מצרים? את ראית פעם מצרים בארץ כנען?
אתה רצחת פעם מצרי, מה? אז למה לך מותר ולנו לא? מה, אתה יותר טוב מאיתנו?
מה זה?
לא, תראו אותו. מסתובב לו בעולם, רוצח איזה מצרי שבא לו, אבל לנו לא. לנו אסור, למה? כי הוא קשה, והוא יכול לרצוח את מי שבא לו.
לא תרצח! לא תרצח! מה לא ברור בזה? תרצח! לא תרצח! פשוט לא! עוד שאלות?
לא, לא. אנחנו, ברשותך, נלך לעבוד את אלוהינו.
לחשוב עליה, אם היא מתה, זה לא נחשב, נכון?
Okay. And there's another one. There's another one coming up. Yeah, it's just very cute. I mean, it's bizarre, but of course it's dark humor. And wait a second, I gotta shut it off now.
יאללה, בוא נאכל משהו.
רגע, פליצה.
מרים, אני ביקשתי ממך לא לקרוא לי ככה ליד העם, נכון?
בסדר, תגיד, מה נראה לך משהו
okay.
מוזר בדיבור?
Pause. Okay, so if you want to look them up, YouTube has so many things. You can watch old TV shows on it. So it's called The Jews Are Coming. Not every one is a subtitle like that. Some of them are not, but there's quite a few that are. And they have it's some ways it's like I said, it's black humor, bittersweet humor. They also have ones about more contemporary issues. Okay, so
What do you have?
what you got there? Oh, Debbie's talking to kids.
I'm sorry. Let me mute me. I got kids here. Sorry.
That's okay. All right. So mute yourself, or I could mute you all. All right. I don't want to turn this in. I don't want this to be a lecture. We are recording it. And the thing I want to emphasize to all of you is, again, I don't teach for the purpose of conversion, but want to remind you, nobody's going to ask you, well, they might ask you, what's your favorite biblical character, or is there something that in the Torah that, you remember quite well? But I want you to be educated Jews. There's so many Jews in the world who don't know diddly about biblical history, the Bible, Torah, the period that we're talking about. But, I want you to be knowledgeable. But on the other hand, as I said to you guys yesterday, Sam and Emily, and today I met with Herbert, the guy from El Salvador that you guys met a couple of weeks ago. We're going to pursue his Beit Din in California, after all. But the Beit Din people, the rabbis will want to know your reasons. Sorry, Joe and Debbie, but the reasons why you want to be a Jew and what your knowledge base. So I want to emphasize that. Now, having said that, let's go back to this one from Torah Terms that we did on the very first or second class, just to review. And please learn these terms. I mean, learn what they mean. Let me get that out of there. But I'll take away the internet. Do you all see Torah Terms study sheet? Yes? Okay, so I call these things by funny names, Torah Terms, sorry, without the H. So let's see if we can go around the room. What is Torah? Anybody? It's right there, A, B, or C.
I'll go.
Okay.
Letter A, the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, etc.
Okay, so you can literally say, I'm looking at a Torah.
My hobby.
What's that?
Hold on. Right.
Oh, all right. So somebody's not muted, but I guess I don't want you muted because you're talking to me. Okay. So, but you can also say, go and pick up the Torah or pick the Torah out of the ark. So they will say the Torah when they're talking about the actual scroll. Technically, that is a Sefer Torah, a book of the Torah. But the third thing, oh, I'm sorry. Somebody else want to read number C?
All Jewish wisdom, law, or learning.
So, yeah. So, teach me your Torah. What is your Torah? What was your life about? What have you learned? And it's an interesting word because it's like the Chinese word Tao. What is the way? And Orthodox Hasidic Jews will say, I'm following the Torah. And I know that they're following interpretations of the rabbis through the Middle Ages of what the Torah says. So Torah means law. That's another word for it. So follow the Torah. I hate to say it, it's kind of the way some Christians will say, following the Bible. But it's also really cool that you can say, I'm studying Torah. Right. And you can say, I'm studying Torah, but you're really not studying the Bible. You might be studying something from, let's say, the Middle Ages. All right. The 5 books, let's review those. They, as I said, in the very first or second class, they have Hebrew names, and then the Greek names came about because of the theme of the books. And so you can look them up. You can see everything has a Greek name as well, even other books, later books. And that happened with the New Testament as well. But the titled book, Genesis, is not just the beginning, but that's what they gave it. And the Hebrew name, as I told you then, I'm saying it again, the Hebrew name for each book comes from the very first or second or third word. So the book is called Bereshit. The first Parsha is also called Bereshit. This is review, I hope. The second book of the Torah, Shemot, is also the first Parsha of Shemot is Shemot. So they didn't have book titles. They didn't say, Frodo's journey. Instead, it was just, Frodo woke up. And so it might be called Frodo. And then we have Vayikra, and he called, which is the name of the first Torah portion of Leviticus, and also the Hebrew name for Leviticus. Is that cool? Is that clear? So you can say, so I could say, and I would do this in synagogue, I would say, we're reading from the book of Devarim. And maybe you'll know, maybe you won't know. I don't expect you to know all this, but it's good to, and I've been telling Sam and Emily, and it's worth it for you guys to go to a conservative synagogue sometime, or even an Orthodox shul, to know the Hebrew names. Okay, let's go back to T, number 1. So T for Torah, N for the Hebrew word Nevi'im, and K or KH for Ketuvim. It's a ch. And then you'll learn, when you learn a little Hebrew, you say the K and the KH are interchangeable. K, ch. So the way that they make, this is review. I know we've done this before, but I want to review it. the way that they make an abbreviation in Hebrew all the way to today, the party you belong to, or the we have FBI, LBJ, IRS. Well, that's initial 1, initial 2, initial 3. To make a abbreviation in Hebrew, you take initial 1, put an in front of it, initial 2, another and initial 3 closes it out. Okay, so Tanakh is the book that we call, sometimes people call it the Hebrew Scriptures, the Jewish Bible, or the Old Testament. Okay, y'all clear on that? All right. We don't like the term Old Testament anymore. If you go to a college level class with a Christian professor, they'll say, we're going to do the Old Testament. I mean, you'll see the word OT, the OT. Oh, what does the OT say? But instead, any good scholar will say Tanakh. And if you go to Amazon or any good bookstore, you say, I want to buy a Tanakh, you can buy it now as a whole set, one book. And it's worth getting it, the JPS version of the Tanakh in English. And it's available in English, it's available bilingually, and it's available with some commentaries, not usually. That's another book. I'm coming up to that. All right, reviewing this stuff, remember, Nevi'im, or prophets, is actually 2 parts. The section known as prophets. The first section consists of the history books, Joshua, Kings 1 and 2, so it's not really prophetic, but it's from that period. So this is from 1000 BCE until the split up of Solomon's kingdom. Then the second, more well-known section of the prophets is the major prophets, the minor prophets, and the actual books of the prophets. And now we have this word that means the number 4 is number 3. The singular of Nevi'im is Navi. Isn't that cool? Like Avatar, right? The Navi. Oh, the Navi. So a Navi is a prophet, could be a leader. Moses was the original prophet. He did many things. He was an administrator. He was a guide. He was a lawgiver. But later prophets are also called Nevi'im or Navi. And by the way, in Arabic, it's Nebi. They call Moses Nebi Musa. Nebi Musa. This is important. I did talk about this. I'm reviewing it. Unlike the Christian way you hear things, or even some Jews will say, oh, it says in the book of Isaiah that this shall happen. Modern scholars have looked at the books of the prophets and said, look, they were making predictions of, what could happen in 50 years, 20 years, if we ask the Egyptians for help, they will not give us help. And so they railed against people's behaviors, but they also were, I guess, in some ways, political commentators of their time. But that doesn't change the possibility that, excuse me, I got to turn the heat up. That doesn't change the possibility that things could sound true. Anybody have a question about that? Good. I mean, I don't have to convince you guys that, what you learned in church was not right, or even the way Jews talk about it. But that doesn't mean, I repeat myself, I had my bar mitzvah in, I won't even say, 1967, and I was moved by Isaiah. I don't remember if that was my actual Haftarah, but, oh, okay, there you go. JT, looks like Jamie's. But the prophecies of Isaiah, it shall come to pass in the end of days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the top of the mountains, and many people shall come. Da, 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 da. It says, and every man will be under his vine and fig tree, and none shall make. So it was all about peace. So it rings true, Anyway, I could get into a riff about end of days. They meant future. They did not mean like, you know, Star Trek. All right. Anyway, and then we did this, so I'll repeat just a little bit of this. The later books were written by people, and then later they had this aura about God, you know, inspired them. And by the way, Thursday mornings, now Thursday noon, each week I'm doing a psalm, if you want to come to those. So we read psalms in Friday night services and Saturday morning services. Okay, so this is review, so I don't want to keep on this. I want to get into the history. Parsha.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, for the ketuvim, is that the same like root word as a ketubah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yay, cool. Excellent. And you'll start to see that. You'll see words Kaddish, Kiddush,
Yeah.
Ketuvim, Ketuvot, Ketubah, Katav. Yes, yes.
Is the root word just based on like a writing then?
Well, it gets into the Hebrew, but KTV, all right, are the three letters. Kuf, Kaf, Tav, Bet. So this will not our Hebrew lesson, but if I were to say, you guys know this, because if I were to say he BGN his meal, BGN, what is BGN? Okay, well, it looks like it's began. So that's what they did. Yes, the Hebrew Hebrew verbs most of them have three radicals, three letters that make up the sound. I know the screen share is on, but you see my hand going three. Yes, so it's exactly the same word. Ketubah, a ketubah is a written document, and she's smart, this chick. Yeah, very good. Thank you. All right, so the writings, as I said, we won't have time to go into all of them. We did talk about this, and if you were there on Sukkot, we read, I remember I sang to everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season. That's from Ecclesiastes. All right, that's the turn, turn. It's really easy to remember this one. Esther is read on Purim. Okay, so now Parsha. This is Parsha, or some call it Sidra, Parshat Shavua, Torah portion of the week. There are 54 Torah portions. This is meant to be review, so we're going to get to the history of this a little bit more. And by the way, all of this, and I will be talking about this week and coming weeks, the rabbis who are the folks, now I'm doing history, the folks who lived 400 to 400 approximately, were the people who took the earlier material and put it in order. So we are the heirs of their arrangements. Torah wasn't written that way. There's no periods, there's no dots. You don't even know where the sentence begins. But later on, the rabbis organized them into 54. Plural of parsha is parshiot. So not too hard to remember because it sounds like a portion, not a Porsche. It's a portion. Although a Porsche would be nice to have. Like I said before, the parsha takes its name from one of the first words. So last week we did Vayera, and he saw. The week before that, Lech Lecha, go out. All right, but some of them do have, Kedoshim is the name of the most famous Torah portion in Leviticus 19, where it says, you shall be holy because I, the Lord, am holy. And it also contains a whole group of moral codes. All right. They don't know exactly, but sometime in the period of the Maccabees, which we'll be reading soon, or maybe a little later, they began the custom of reading a section of the prophets, that's the Nevi'im again, after the Torah reading. And sometimes there's a theme that echoes in the Haftarah. So that is called Haftarah. And if you say it in Ashkenazi pronunciation, it sounds like Haftorah. What's the Haftorah? I was growing up. What the hell? What's a Torah? I got a Torah and a Haftorah. Wait a minute. What? So it means the kid, the bar mitzvah boy or girl, will have a Torah reading, and then they have to read, right, Sam? Right? Something. So it might be Jeremiah. So Haftarah means conclusion, and not all of them will be read throughout the year. I mean, we may not read the entire books of the prophets. All right, number C. Some believe this came to practice during the persecutions of the Greeks. All right, number 8, Aliyah. Remember, this is going up to chant from the Torah or to do the blessing on the Torah. Maftir we don't have to do today, but that means the extra person who, because call it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plus 1. Number 8 is called Maftir. And the book that we use, remember when we open up the Eitz Chaim, the red book, or the blue book, right? That's called a Chumash. Okay, Chumash has all the Torah and Haftarah readings for the year, plus it has commentaries, and that is really cool. All right, now let's go to let's do this quick review. This is we're doing a lot of material today, but some of you have seen these before. This is the 5 stages of Jewish history, which I have. It's in there. Why can't I get it? There it is. Okay. 5 stages of Jewish civilization. You remember the very first class, so not everybody was in it. That's okay. Or you weren't there. But the thesis behind our learning this year, can you see it all? Okay, is that, and we're in this place right here, but we're going to go to this place. We're going to the Roman or Greco-Roman period, or so. Remember for the simple way of remembering is biblical, rabbinic, medieval, modern, contemporary. Call it postmodern. And in each stage, there are literature that's being produced, and then there's leaders over here. This is supposed to be a column over there. There are issues and problems, and then there's a crisis that just got moved over, a crisis that happens. So the biblical period, which is, I don't want to bore you. I want you to be excited. The biblical period actually has several periods within it. You've got the ancient stuff, and I'm not going to talk about Adam and Eve or Noah or the Tower of Babel, but the stories that make up those several first Torah portions are part of our culture. The epic stories that we have. Then we begin in earnest with the idea that Abraham is given a covenant, and then God says, okay, now I'm going to make a covenant with all of the people at Mount Sinai. And so all of this is being produced. So there's the early period might be called patriarchal. Then we have the Exodus, and then we have the period of the settling of the land when Joshua and then they choose a king. So, and then later, I talked about this in one of our early classes, there's a differentiation between of duties, right? Moses is everybody. He's the prophet, he's the administrator, he's the leader, but Aaron is the priest, and Aaron and his sons run the ritual, the Levites. So later on, we have the king, of course, David, then Solomon, or Saul, David, Solomon, and then there is a kind of a rivalry between the king and the prophet. Sometimes, the prophet says things the king doesn't like. And so that comes to a crashing halt with the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. In a minute, we'll look at a timeline. But it kind of, I'd rather put Ezra and Nehemiah here than here, because they belong in this period, and also because the books are in the Torah, the Bible, and the last books in writings are Ezra and Nehemiah. And so I've told you this before. You remember they go to Babylonia. Babylonia is conquered by the Persians. Cyrus issues an edict saying you can go back, and then begins what you might call the Second Temple period. So we'll be looking at that. What I intend to do in the next few weeks, this is 1, 2, 3, and then Chronica, and then a little bit about Christian stuff, is all this coming up. And I just was discussing this today with Herbert, the guy from LA. What is Midrash, Rabbi? Okay, it's commentaries. What is Mishnah? It's oral law that was put down, and then they said, well, you can't write it down. Oh, they had to eventually. So, and then what is Gemara? Gemara is commentaries on the Mishnah. All of this is how to be a Jew, right? So today, the best way I could give a parallel is an asteroid hits the Earth, right? And we all have to get on, like on a science fiction movie, we all have to get on spaceships and go to another planet. And that's what happened when Israel was destroyed by the Romans. They finally said, well, we're going to write it down. And that's why they needed the Mishnah. We're not going into this yet. But in this period, we also have, for a brief time, and that's coming up, Hellenism. What's Hellenism? Anybody? Is it everybody?
Is it a Roman belief system?
The Greek.
Yeah.
The Greek belief, yeah. So there is this brief period when the Hasmoneans, also called the Maccabees, rebel against Greeks, and then the Greeks leave us alone for a little while. We'll get into this. And then the Romans come in and we're in charge now. So these are the things that differentiate the biblical from the rabbinic period. In the rabbinic period, we're going to get to it. Now, even though there are still kings, they're kind of like puppets of the Romans. The last one would have been Herod, right? King Herod. He was appointed by the Romans. There was not really independence, but they developed, as you know, I'm just glancing at this, don't worry, the difference between the Sadducees, who were the priests, and the Pharisees, who were the rabbis. We also have in this period the beginning of the various sects down in Qumran by the Dead Sea, the Zealots, and the early apostles, right? So Christianity belongs in this period too. So these are the overall, so 2000 to around 538 is biblical. And then this period, you could go any way you like. I try to do it more exact, 538 to 70, or you could just make it easy on yourself, say 400 to 400. And that is when then, and 400 is when Rome is destroyed. Okay, now let's look. Go ahead, anybody? Okay, let's look at more detail about that period from the this is from the intro program in Denver. Okay, I've sent this to you. I hope you read it, but it's not. This is not academic. It's not the text. The text that you should read is good old Stand Back. You'll have fun with it if you haven't read it already. But to have a general sense of literacy, here you go. Torah, a drama in 6 acts. This is review. Prehistory, right? I mean, we're not sitting here. We're not talking about, was there a flood? Can you find the ark on top of a mountain in Armenia? I just hope that doesn't sound like I'm being glib, but it's really, people who talk that way ought to have their heads examined, like that guy in Mississippi who built a replica of the ark. But it's important. It really does teach us our history and our mythology. And as I said, we have the patriarchs and the matriarchs, or we might call them the mamas and the papas. I'm dating myself. Then we have the Exodus story, part 1, slavery redemption, part 2, right, the covenant and everything that is involved with it. And then we have in Numbers, that's the 4th book, the stories that are told of the wanderings to 38 years, let's say 2 years up until they get to Mount Sinai. And then they send the spies into the land. They come back and say, "Oh, it's beautiful, but we'll never conquer it." And so they're doomed to wander. The Numbers covers the next 38 years. And in Deuteronomy, a lot of laws in Deuteronomy too. All right. And then Moses' final speeches. And that's where we get the Shema from, right? Hear, O Israel, I want you to remember this. Adonai is our God. You shall love your God with all your heart and soul. And we take the words of Deuteronomy as law. So much of the two places in the Torah that have the most laws are Leviticus and Deuteronomy. So this is cute. If you want, you should learn this, but it's, again, we're not doing Bible studies, neither Jewish nor Christian, but just so you know, this is what it looks like. And they put in the whatever you want to call them, the second wife or the concubine. So Sarah and Abraham, this is the genealogy, Isaac, and we follow the line of Isaac. We know that. But Ishmael is pretty important, not just for Muslims, but even there was a time when Ishmael was a Jewish name. There were several rabbis in the Talmud called Rabbi Ishmael, but today, once Islam takes it over, it's not our name anymore. And we have the Jacob. So this is all following Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There they are. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Now, remember, I know you knew this, but remember, Leah is let's say, the less favored wife, but she gives birth to all of these sons and Dinah, right? Don't forget Dinah. A lot of stories about Dinah, and feminists today kind of like to examine the story of Dinah. She's raped by a guy, and it's a really gross story, but it's also about a woman, and her sense of self. But we're not doing Bible stories, but why does Jacob always think about Joseph? He dotes on his son and the second son, Benjamin, because they came from his beloved Rachel. And Rachel dies in childbirth to Benjamin, which is also metaphorical. These are not just stories. The idea that several generations of women had trouble conceiving is very crucial, very emotional as a sense of ourselves. And then we have two more handmaidens, Silpa and Bilhah. So those are the 12 tribes, or 12 sons, but then they become 12 tribes. Now, this is also really good. I mean, now we're getting to real history. When they say Abraham and Sarah came from Ur. Ur is a real place. I did this a couple of weeks ago, I believe, but let's review. So down here is the Tigris and Euphrates River, leading down into the Gulf of Suez. Yes, yeah, Suez. No, this is Suez, the Gulf of Arabia. And if you are told to go to this land, back then you would die in the middle of the desert because of how hot it got. So they always, and also shepherds, you knew this, right? Shepherds followed the water. So this is the so-called Fertile Crescent. Did you learn about it in 5th grade or 6th grade? Because I did. Right? So you go up the Tigris Euphrates River, and Abraham and his father Terach get to Haran. Then he journeys down to Shechem, and then it shows you, interestingly, that Abraham and then later on Isaac went to Egypt, and here is the 12 tribes, or the migration to Egypt, where they became slaves, and here they trace back their journey back to Israel. Isn't that interesting? 40 years in the wilderness. Okay. So another thing that this slide talks about that's interesting is the idea that, again, we're looking Bible as history, that we look at ourselves as having a covenant with Hashem, with God. And so I've talked about this, that first God says, here's a covenant with you and Adam and Eve, right? Just be nice to each other. And don't eat don't eat that tree. You can't, it never says eat animals. So Adam and Eve were considered to be vegetarians. So there's covenant number one. Covenant number two is, or brit, the word is brit in Hebrew. Covenant number two is with Noah. Noah. I now establish my covenant with you and the birds and the cattle. I will maintain my covenant with you, and so on and so forth, and the rainbow sign. Covenant number three is, picking one person, family to carry it on. And so, as I've told you before, God kind of evolves himself or herself and says, you know what? I need somebody to model good behavior. And then that doesn't, it works, but finally, eventually, we have the covenant with all of the Jewish people, right? The Mount Sinai. And you could even argue that there's a fifth covenant in Deuteronomy. Isn't that cool? All right. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is your God, and there it is, the covenant. There's okay. Another way of looking at it, that this is Rabbi Eddie Feinstein, says 3 acts. Act 1, God. God wants the world to be perfect and tries. Act 2, God couldn't create a suitable partner, so he chooses one man, Noah.
USA.
What? Comment?
From USA.
I couldn't hear that. Who's talking? It sounded like Debbie. All right, I'll open for questions in just a moment. Okay. And Act 3 is Avram, soon to be called Avraham. So let's see. That's not, I'm not going to do any more on that. Let me go to the second slide, chapter 2. And this is also from Denver. Somebody needed? Okay. Okay, this is a review because we have this, we talked about this. Screen share. Tanakh. Okay, so the the 3 major sections, as I said, are 5 books of Moses, Nevi'im, prophets, K for Ketuvim. Now, if you wanted to, and those of you who grew up in church, this is the layout, and if you buy yourself a Tanakh, very cheap, I'm not cheap, I don't want to say cheap, very reasonable on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and this is how they lay them out. So, as I said before, Joshua to 2 Kings is historical books. By the way, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel are often called the major prophets. They're big, they're important, and their prophecies are really pivotal. Hosea, and these are called the 12 minor prophets. They're anything but minor, believe me. But when you get up here to, let's say, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, but especially Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, that is pre-exilic, meaning this is all happening just before the exile and very emotional, right? So, and then, of course, people might argue, how does Isaiah know that we're going to be exiled? How does Jeremiah know? There are those professors and scholars who suggest that really some of this was edited afterwards. Like, for example, Jeremiah went down to Egypt. The old Egypt, but he went as part of the exile. He didn't go to Babylonia. He escaped to Egypt. And here is the third section, as I said, Proverbs. So there you got it. So if you want to read some great history, Ezra and Nehemiah, that's going to tell you about the beginnings of the Second Temple. And Chronicles is after they return. It's also it's good history. It's real history stuff. So here, what I want to do is, I don't like to do timelines, and they're really, maybe it'll mean something to you, maybe it won't. But Whoops, I lost it. Okay, stop share, stop that share. Oh, I said I was going to open for questions. Go ahead. Who got a question? If it's a God question, we covered it last week, but go ahead. Anything goes. No? Yes? All right.
Oh, I have a question if that's okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay, sure.
So some of the stories, sorry if this is a kind of a God question, but do you see the stories more as kind of like metaphors versus actually happening?
Oh, well, it depends on what you're talking about. I
Okay.
would differentiate, Taylor, between the stories of the matriarchs, the patriarchs, the Exodus, and so on, and real history. I mean, not real history, history that we can find archaeologically. So yes, I believe, and it's not just I believe, I know that slavery happened in Egypt and the Exodus happened. But as if you stick around a few months when they get to Exodus, one of the questions that I ask is, did this really happen? Were there really, they say 600,000 people were at Mount Sinai. Come on, 600,000 people traipsing through the Sinai desert. There would be some kind of remnants there. There'd be pottery shards or something. So another theory that's proposed by historians, and I'm not trying to tell you there's no tooth fairy. It's real, it's possible. But it could have been that the Exodus was carried out by a group of Levites, additionally some Egyptians or Hyksos who came with them. And maybe there were 200 people, maybe there were 500, maybe eventually there were 1,000. So because they children and so on. But here's what we do know, and this is not in this slide, but in they had a thing called a stela, so that's not from Streetcar Named Desire, Stella, but a stela was nobody remembers that. Anyway, a stela is a stone with writing on it. And so there is an Egyptian stela that celebrates the conquest of Canaan, not Joshua's. All we know is Menerpta, a pharaoh in Egypt, said, "We have conquered them," because they didn't like the fact that all these people ran away. So it's possible they think that the Exodus could have been around 1250 BCE. All right. By the way, I could go back here. The answer to your question is some things are not metaphor. Some things are folklore that have been passed down, especially the patriarchs and the matriarchs. I believe that some of the Exodus stories, the Ten Commandments, all that stuff, has to have been part of our tradition. But what I'm getting at here is that today in Israel, they're obsessed with this, but archaeologists have found the ruins of Jericho, and that's the period of Joshua. Was it like the Torah says? They walked around blowing the shofar and the walls fell down? Not likely, but it might have been that there was some sort of a conquest, or also that we talked about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah last week in the synagogue. There were earthquakes. So all we know is that you can go to Jericho, which happens to be in the West Bank, but you can go there and you will be able to see levels below levels below levels below levels. Here's what we do know as historical fact. There were period of the Judges. Here we go, 1200, 1100, the beginning of the settlement of the land. And this is called the Judges, the period of the Judges. All right. And then remember they say in Samuel 1, we want a king. Everybody has a king. Okay, here's a king, King Saul. And here's his approximate rule. And then, King Saul is a little bit like Richard Nixon. He's becomes a little paranoid in his later life, especially because David is more popular than him, and people love David, and David becomes and Saul dies in battle against the Philistines. This period of the judges into the early David period is also very hard because they're fighting just to maintain their land, and there's always the Philistines who are today's Gaza Strip. They come in from the sea, and so they're always fighting. So King Saul dies in a battle with the Philistines. And what David appears to have done is unified the kingdom. Was it as big as the Torah says it, the Bible says it is? Probably not. Probably he settles in Jerusalem. This is very important. He centralizes worship. That was important. Let me see check the clock. Okay, 7:48. Another major issue for that time was you could worship in the period of the judges. You worship, wherever. So they had the Ark of the Covenant. Remember the ark that was in the desert, the same ark that's in Raiders of the Lost Arks. That's somewhat mythical, but it's true. They did have a movable shelter in which the Ten Commandments or the tablets were kept, and that was moved from place to place. And eventually they would say, well, it's going to be in Shiloh. No, it's going to be in Bethel. Eventually, David centralizes worship, and the prophets do too, the priests. So that is the beginning of the building of the first temple on the top of Mount Zion. But really, to be honest with you, that's left to Solomon to finish. Solomon, if you remember from the stories, not only, he's a wise king, he was a smart king. It wasn't just that he, said, okay, there's two women who both claim to be the mother of this child. We're going to cut the baby in half. Oh, no. All those stories about him. He also fell in love with the Queen of Sheba, who was probably Ethiopian. He had a lot of wives, so even though Solomon is lauded as a great king, he expanded the kingdom. He made alliances with the king of Tyre, which is Lebanon today, and that's how I got the cedars of Lebanon. And so it's Solomon that builds the temple up and develops the economy, the real economy of Jerusalem and of Judea. Unfortunately, King David didn't do a great job with his sons, and there was rivalry between Solomon and his brother. And Solomon had an even harder time, and there was a rivalry between the two principal sons, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And so they divide the monarchy into the Judah. That's how we have the name Judah, and Israel. So Israel is technically the northern half from that period. So we're up to 900 BCE. Let's keep going. And this is what's interesting here is that this is the period, 850 is the period of the classical prophets, actually earlier, even 850. Elijah, Isaiah, Isaiah, and the beginnings of prophecy here. And that's when they begin to talk about, if you're not, this is key to understanding the mentality of the prophets and our mentality as a people. Remember, I talked about this in class. We're so devoted to God that we say, instead of turning into pagans, God punished us, right? So that makes us survive. We survived by saying it was all part of God's plan. So the prophets began to say, things look bleak if you don't. Here they are, classical prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, 750 to 550. So Elijah is quite early, but this period is quite chaotic because the kingdom is still there. Eventually, and it comes in two parts. Northern kingdom of Israel is conquered by Assyria. Don't ask me to explain the difference between Assyria and Babylonia. They're the same area. Assyria is northern and Babylonia is southern, but they're different tribes, so different kingdoms. So Assyria comes and conquers the northern kingdom. They're taken away, and they call them the 10 lost tribes. And but that is still today, that is northern Israel. And then Babylonia comes and conquers the southern kingdom, and this is the kicker, 586 BCE. It's just everything you read about how they felt, as they watched the temple burn, was very disastrous. But it's interesting that Jeremiah predicts that the exile will only last for 70 years. And sure enough, it is about 70 years, right? And then 539, so 586 to 539 is when Cyrus conquers Persia, and we are given the permission to return. And so, and this is going to lead us into the beginning of the rabbinic period. Ezra is a scribe. I'm saying this on purpose for next week, maybe for next week. We'll see if we can get to it. Ezra is essentially the last of the scribes, not the last of the prophets, but he is a scribe, but he becomes a teacher. And in becoming a teacher, he is essentially the first rabbi. Is that making sense? I mean, because there's a scene in the book of Ezra where he stands in the marketplace and he reads the Torah to the people in Hebrew and translating it into Aramaic. And he says, I will explain what this means. And as soon as you say the word explain, you're doing drush. You learn that word. Darash means to explain, to give a commentary. When you go to church, people would do that. Say, this is what Jesus meant. So he becomes, and essentially, the first explainer of the Torah. And so that begins, we could almost say, it begins the process of rabbinic understanding. So I won't have time to do all of this, the prophets. What is a prophet? Okay. Now, let me do a little more of the history stuff. Okay. I think let's look at this one. I sent this to you guys as it's a bigger version of, okay, and where is it? 5 stages. I sent it to you. 5 stages biblical. Let's see if I can find it. Is it rabbinic period? No, that's not it. Okay, I got to go to my AOL. Did you guys see I sent something to you the other day? I said this is an expanded version of Jewish. Oh, here it is. Jewish civilization expanded timeline. Okay, and so let's just look at this. I don't want to, like I said, I took Jewish history classes in college and then again in rabbinical school. It's interesting that we're looking at what is going on in the rest of the world. You may remember, sorry, Christina, other people maybe that joined late, my thesis, not mine, but the general thesis of this class and of the way that people teach history today is everything that's going on inside of the Jewish world is a reflection of what's going on in the dominant society. Think about yourselves. Whenever you were born, 50s, 60s, 70s. Sorry, Debbie. You and I are the old folks here. And Joe's even older than us. But we remember stuff that was going on and it influences us. So in the biblical period, just a little bit, I'm not an expert on this. It's interesting that as this is showing up, while we're developing the stories, as Taylor asked, the stories of the patriarchal families, the Mosaic, the monarchic, other things are going on in the rest of the world. What is our major problem in the biblical period? The pagans, idols, polytheism, and they're always persecuting us. But it's not the persecution we know today, or even the Middle Ages. It's kind of like, why are you guys so weird? There is even a word I want to introduce you to here. I'm glad we're recording this. Monotheism means the belief in one God. Technically, what happened to Devin? He just sent me a text. Uh-oh. Oh, thank you. He sent me Christina's email. Okay. And and again, this is stuff I got from rabbinical school. Technically, the early Israelite period said it's monolatrism. We have one God, but our God is better than your God. You know, it's like my dad's bigger than your dad. So it really didn't become monotheism. Is there is one God over everything. That begins to develop in the exile to Babylonia as a part of our survival. Again, this survival mechanism that we had. Maybe the God of the Hebrew, our God is no longer we're no longer in Judea, we're in Babylonia. How are we going to worship God? That was what they asked. Psalm 137, by the waters of Babylon, where we sat down. And how can we sing King Alpha's song? That's the reggae version. How can we sing God's praise in a foreign land? So they developed the idea that maybe God is the God of the entire universe. Okay. Number two, there were even vestiges of idolatry in Israel. And that a great example of that is Elijah versus Ahav and Jezebel. Remember Jezebel? And Elijah says, this is in Kings, First Kings, I think. Okay, go up on Mount Carmel, which is in Haifa today. Go up on Mount Carmel, and you take your sacrifice, the prophets of Baal, the priests of Baal, and I'll take my my sacrifice, and we can see whose laundry gets whiter. My detergent is better than yours. Poof, and they all die, and God takes up his sacrifice. So that's an example of that. So what I will tell you, and I don't want to get into a discussion about today's paganism. I told you last time I had a girlfriend who was a Wiccan years ago, but the ancient pagans were like the Moabites. They were very gross people. But in Israel, there was a book I read on this. There was a belief for a time of some kind of Hebrew goddess, and had various names for God. I told you that also. So Elijah, as some of the other prophets, are purists. There was only one God. You cannot have those idols. And so there were Jewish legitimate or Judean idols of a time. So eventually, though, and I'm not saying this is bad or wrong or good, but eventually it gave way to pure Yahwism, if you want to call it that. All right, another issue that's very big in that period is, I mentioned number 4, survival against these huge empires. Babylonia in the east, and Egypt in the southwest, but also between themselves. There was with Solomon, as I said, was such a great king, but guess what? Jerusalem got wealthier, and that's why the prophets always raved against, not taking care of the poor, the widow, the orphan, because as things got bigger and there became more urbanized, that brings about poverty. And so there was a sense that there was a growing gap, just like today, folks, between the rich and the poor. Another big issue was, as I said, southern Judea and northern Israel, and the two brothers. All right, so but what's going on over here in this period? A couple of things. I'm not an expert on them, but once upon a time in LA, in Orange County, I went to a big Turkish history event, and they showed like things of the Hittite Empire. It was all over Turkey, and so it was huge. And so the Hittites were in this time. So we're here, we're here, there. In Egypt, there was a period where the Hyksos, we don't know who the Hyksos were exactly, but it is one theory is that the Hyksos were a group of people who, like the Judean, like the Israelites, were made slaves. They may have joined up. That's why they say maybe there was a sort of the fellow travelers. We have this guy. I'm not going to do all these, but we have this guy Hammurabi. When you were in 7th grade, you probably learned about Hammurabi's code, right? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Hammurabi is the king of Babylonia, but he's also kind of like a Moses. And there's pictures of Hammurabi, there's a bas-relief of him receiving the law from the heavens, right? We took Hammurabi's code and we have the same code in the Torah, but instead of saying an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, literally, I'll stop to share. Okay, you hit me, I get to hit you back. You killed my brother, I get to kill you. You know, instead it becomes for the Hebrews, it becomes you have to give recompense. You know, the law. So they use the same words. Is that making sense? The eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for life. But usually, what it becomes really is they legal restitution. Okay. Anyway, so some of those things are interesting. Now, another interesting thing from this period is, as we're saying, the guys say, we want a king, we want a king. That's because all the other peoples had their kings. So this is some of the events that are happening around this time. Anyway, let's see. Who has a question about the kings or the prophets, or should I? Oh, I'll say it again. I recommend, maybe we should just stop the class, stop the screen share and just read this guy. Read it in bed, read it in the place which I will not say. You know, you'll find yourself getting really hooked into it. So chapter part 1 covers that, the invisible God from 2000 to 1200. That's the up to the Exodus. And then part 2, this is cute. Let's see. Saul. Oh, okay. The tribes united between a big brooding farmer named Saul and drove the Philistines back to the coast. In 1020 BCE, Saul became the first king of the Israelite nation, but the crown sat uneasily on his head. And then there's a picture of, David fighting Goliath. So David is really, okay, bye, Taylor. David is really kind of cool because he is the kind of the upstart. Everybody, again, Solomon, this is a great page 33. Solomon created a dazzling palace for his wives and a magnificent temple for the Ark of the Covenant. I suppose I would ask the question, maybe in some ways, and this will bridge into next week, in some ways, you always see pictures of how beautiful the temple was. And, we don't sacrifice animals anymore, but in some ways, this is why I said the civilization, we are living in a Jewish civilization, but modeling the bigger civilization. Oh, this is nothing. I had a boo-boo. So everybody looks to the west or the east, and they have a king, we need a king. They have a big temple, we need a big temple. So that's why Solomon is kind of like obsessed with building up the temple in Jerusalem.
Question about King David.
Yeah. Was he a
if I
good guy or
remember-
bad guy? Yeah. Go ahead.
If I remember correctly, the Star of David is from a shield or something. Do we have like more theories of like where the star came from, or like why that symbol was chosen?
Excellent question. As a matter of fact, that relates to the Hanukkah thing a little bit. The earliest symbol, I don't want to again tell you there's no tooth fairy. The earliest symbol of the Judean nation, and therefore the Jewish people, is the 7-branch menorah. Go to the our sanctuary, or any, the big or the small. Every synagogue will typically have in front of the synagogue a 7-branch menorah, a 7, not 8. And then that became that was in the Holy Temple. What is that symbol? It is most likely a replica of the burning bush. We don't know. And there's theory, again, I'm going to get off on the mysticism, but it's believed that it could be that the middle candle is Shabbat, and you're going up to Shabbat, 1, 2, 3, Shabbat, and down, 1, 2, 3. So there's all sorts of symbolism, but the 6-pointed star may have been around in the later post-exilic time, just after the exile. It became known as the Seal of Solomon. But if you go to, like I say, you go to the Ark of Triumph in Rome, what do you see? A bunch of, a bas-relief of Roman soldiers carrying the menorah, all the gold out of the temple. So there's no mention of the Jewish star, of the so-called Magen David, or sign of David. What more likely is it became a part of because they could no longer relate to the menorah because there was no temple. We had 8 branches for Hanukkah, but that's only for Hanukkah. So it's believed that the 6-pointed star became a symbol within Kabbalah in the Middle Ages, and therefore the Jews. I mean, I'm not saying Kabbalah is a subject unto itself. So it became a symbol for the Jews in the Middle Ages. As to when, it might have begun as early as the 13th century. Isn't that interesting? We all thought the Star of David, the Star of David. Nobody has, you don't wear, a little menorah here. Another symbol, is the Chai, life, Chet Yud. So, but yeah, that's a great question. When did the so-called Star of David become a star? Now, when I was growing up, and this will relate to Hanukkah, we used to have pictures of the Maccabees, the valiant Maccabees, and they had the shield, and on their shield they had the 6-pointed star. Again, that's a story. We don't know. But it may have been concurrent with the menorah, but it did not become a symbol of Jews or Judaism until the Middle Ages. And then, unfortunately, it also became a symbol of persecution, that the Jews would have to wear something to separate themselves. Okay, let's see what else we can cover in terms of history or questions. Guys got questions? Did I freak you out by telling you that that it's possible that Jews or Judeans did have idols? Okay, good. I'm glad. I mean, this is what I learned from rabbinical school, and it blew my mind because I was always taught, oh, we've always worshipped the one God. It's kind of interesting too, from a feminist point of view. I mean, I go off on a bit of a tangent. If, let's say, there's a story that goes, and this is really old, but it's an ancient story. Rebecca, I'm sorry, is it Rachel? No, Rebecca leaves with Jacob, and leaves Lavan, her brother, and takes some sort of things that belonged to the family, and they were the family, maybe the family statues, family idols. They were idols of that time, and she carries them in her saddle, and then he rushes after them, and he demands to get them back. So that's number one. Number two, I mentioned in the time of Elijah, there was a big issue, and it wasn't just the Baal worship. The book is called The Hebrew Goddess by Raphael Patai, and he's an Israeli scholar. and there were Patai's two T's, I think. And there were various theories that suggest, for example, here's a good one that's legitimately Judean. The word Sophia means, wise woman. Chokhmah in Hebrew, wisdom. So God says in the Zohar, with wisdom, God created this. So what was wisdom? It was a personified kind of feminine side. The other word that you're familiar with that I mentioned in the last class is Shekhinah, right? So one theory, and I'm not going off on a far out tangent here, one theory was that God had the prophets were obsessed with creating one God, but there was this undercurrent of God has to have a consort. Everybody else has a consort. Zeus has Hera. What does God have? Well, God is not male or female, but so there's a feminine side. In the way I do it today, the way Kabbalists developed it is because they were concerned. God forbid we should become polytheistic. Said it's one God with two parts. I mean, look at you guys. We got, well, I'm not heterosexist, but we got couples here, you're male and female. So there is male and female in me. We are all bi-gendered. We all have those qualities. Anyway, the interesting thing is that there was, I sent it only to Christina. Sorry about that. Okay, I sent it. I just sent it to everybody. The Hebrew goddess, I'll do it again. And that's only one of several books. And today there is a lot of study being conducted. Sorry about that. Because that was the last person I chatted with. So anyway, it's a side issue, but it's relevant because, this develops into Christianity, because again, in Christianity, they said originally they may have had the Father, the Mother, and the Son. But no, we can't have a mother. Got to have it. We'll call it the Holy Spirit. It was female. So it's an interesting thing. And today I know a lot of Jews who, not only radical feminists, but a lot of people who will say God, goddess, or he, she. God is not male. I mean, I'm obsessed with that idea that God does not have genitalia. And even the problem that it said last week, even the problem that we say God, he, Hebrew happens to be a gendered language, just like Spanish or Italian. So, but anyway, part of the history is that it existed. And what is fascinating is I went to a couple of museums in Israel, and there were images of usually of women. And they may have been idols from the time. Okay, what else can we cover that we didn't, that I want to hit here? What's really important, going back to the beginnings of next week, is, we lived in a society that told us, you guys are so crazy. Yes. God the Mother. Okay. Oh, really? There's a sect that tries to proselytize. There is a trend, as I said, to say we got to survive. We got to survive no matter what. And the Jews were so hard-headed, the Judeans, now the Jews, that we said, I'll repeat it again, our God is so powerful that to make your imitation God come over and attack us, to punish us for doing bad things, for being idolatrous, or for not following the covenant. So they continued that, and that helped us to survive even into the Middle Ages, right? And it is a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Triumphalist, right? We're better than you. But how do you think Black people survived, in 400 years of slavery? They said, we are the victims, but we are better than the people who enslave us. So that's one thing. Next, the second thing I mentioned, and I'm repeating it, is it's almost as though, I'm not going to say it was meant to be, but it could have been, that by going to Babylonia seeing Babylonia was not the wilds. It was a very established city. It's like, we're going to take you out of, I want to say not Wyoming, but let's say Philadelphia or Denver, drag you across country, and you're going to end up in New York City. Oh my goodness, look at this, these huge people, but they're pagans. They're horrible people. And somehow it's possible, this is again, not speculation, Ezra and Nehemiah weren't just good Jewish guys, but they learned how to work with the king, especially once Cyrus takes over, and then Darius, his son. So the idea maybe, again, I'm putting this in, instead of talking about it in miraculous terms, and King Cyrus issued an edict saying, you may go back to Judea. Maybe the Babylonians said, you know what, we need some people over there. Who are these dudes here? Oh, well, let them go over there. We'll establish a bulwark in Judea. Is that making sense? So Ezra and Nehemiah may have come back with some sponsorship, but eventually, Persia goes down the tubes too. So we're stuck. We're back in the land. And the last thing that I want to watch the clock, 8:19. We got to open up for questions. The last thing with this period is, like I said before about Ezra, or that whole period. Once we establish that Torah is preeminent, I'm not talking about writings and prophets, that's important, but once you say Torah is the key, you must follow the Torah, then, well, how do we know what to do? We got to find teachers. And then Ezra becomes the first teacher, and then that's the beginnings of the rabbinic period. The idea that you have to learn, we talked about this, right? Right. Actually, Sam and Emily and I were talking yesterday about how to kosher your home for Pesach. I mean, for good. So you learn that the way this develops, and that's why Torah gives rise to Midrash, with commentaries. Midrash, you'd have enough commentaries. You need to have a very short, simple, I'm getting into next week. You have to have a short, simple, what do you do? How do you do it? Mishnah. That's a bunch of rabbis sitting around discussing orally what the law is. And it doesn't even explain, sometimes where. It just says, this is how you conduct the Seder. This is how you build a sukkah. And then the next stage was they go to Babylonia. This is the new Babylonia after the Romans destroy the temple, and they develop a third section, which we call Gemara. That's next week's talk. And so I guess this is a good way of saying, unlike Christianity, although Christianity wouldn't admit it, but unlike Christianity, we are not only biblically based. I mean, if that were the case, we'd be beating children and stoning people, for eating shrimp or for committing blasphemy. We don't follow the Torah by itself. We follow rabbinic interpretation of the Torah, and then Middle Ages rabbinic interpretation of those rabbinic interpretations. So that's why we're called Jews, not Judeans. I should review that one. This is, again, just to break the mythology. Hebrew or Ivri, Hebrew, children of Israel, or the Israelites, then Judeans, and that gives birth to Jews. So it is not exactly correct to say the Jews were in Egypt. Our predecessors were in Egypt. It's like saying, I'm Italian. Oh, does that mean you're Roman? No, Rome is gone. All right, opening up for questions, comments, arguments, debates, whatever, including non sequiturs. Yo? Joe, you're always good for something.
Now, Rabbi?
Yep, Debbie, hi.
Hi. I'm going to go to something else. What psalm are we doing on Thursday?
Oh, I hadn't decided yet. I think it would be great. Okay, I think it would be great to do what I've been threatening to do is one of the heavies, like Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the mountains, from where does my help come? The Lord will guard your coming and going from this time forth and forevermore. It's the one I always do when somebody's sick.
Okay.
Oh, and
As-
by the way, that is also key to this. Who wrote the Psalms? And this is an interesting question. Everything in Jewish history kind of becomes, there's a word I want you to learn. It's called pseudepigrapha. It sounds really complicated. Pseudepigrapha. It's another way of saying, I didn't write this, somebody else did. All right. So, and this goes to the future. A guy named Moses de Leon produces a book called the Zohar in 15th century Spain, and he says, "Oh, I found this book. It was written by Shimon Bar Yochai in Roman times." Probably not true. He wrote it himself, or he developed it, but probably based on oral traditions. But pseudepigrapha was saying something is so old that it was written by somebody. Song of Songs was written by Solomon when he was young. Proverbs was written by Solomon when he was in middle age, and Ecclesiastes written by Solomon when he was an old man. Psalms were written by King David. More likely, the Psalms were written under sponsorship of somebody in David's time, which doesn't make it less holy, I hope. All right. And
Hey, Rabbi, I'm not sure. Joe might have been able to starting to say something.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure. I didn't. Joe, did you have something?
No.
Okay, I thought you were going to say something. I didn't want to
All right.
make sure you were heard.
Nope.
It's good to see you, though.
Yeah. And I don't want you to come away having lost faith, but gained faith by seeing the historical connections with the biblical period. The best way I could give this over to you, and I urge you to watch part 1 and start part 2 of the history film I sent you. I can't. We could have watched it here, but it would have been kind of tedious. What it does is, and it's really good. It's called the Jews: A History of a People. It's based in the guys who produced it are in Europe, and one of the things they do is they don't cover the biblical period like, hello, this is God speaking, I'm going to create the world. Instead, they start at the beginning of the film is Ezra and his buddies sitting around after the destruction of the temple, talking about the stories of the past. And then it goes back and says, here's the traditions. So it's really quite interesting that it starts with this period of just after the exile. We're trying to make sense of the earlier stories. So I want you to think about that. But it will make sense. But one more thing I was going to say, when you go to Israel, you're able to see the Western Wall. They're even excavating underneath the wall to see remnants of, they may have gotten to David's time. Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, that's okay.
I don't. How do we know what like year 1 is?
Oh, that's interesting. It's great. We're stuck with the counting that was established by the Gregorian calendar in whatever that was, 14th century, and then they go back to say, Jesus was born in year 0, which he really wasn't. He would probably be born 4 BCE. But in the biblical period, they would count, they would say in the 5th year of the reign of King so-and-so, or in the 3rd year after the great destruction. So things were counted by periods. They didn't count history the way we do today. The first historian that we know of is Herodotus, the Greek historian. Starts to, and there were Egyptian historians too. So what is year one by the Jewish calendar is creation. That's
okay.
that's year one is creation. And what they did, and of course this is not historically correct, but we are in 5,785. Wait a minute. No, I mean, if you read a traditional Jewish history book, I can show you one. They'll say, the Exodus took place in this year, and they actually have it, not 1250 BCE. So when we're stuck with the Gentile calendar, we then go back and say, oh, okay, Moses belongs in this period. And so, but what I do find interesting, even though yes. Oh no, Christina, thank you. Simon Schama is very good too. I'm going to send them all out. Simon Schama's history is good. This is a different one. And when now I have your email, I will send you what I send everybody. But they're all good. The Jews, people's history. And I'll send the link out again. But yeah, Simon Schama's, I used to show Simon Schama's, I still have it. And the other one I used to show so long ago was Abba Ibn, Heritage, Civilization and the Jews. And it is still good. And the Jews. It's just that it's from the 80s and it opens with a shot of the Twin Towers in New York City before 9/11. And Abba Ibn is long gone. Nobody remembers who he is now. He was a well-known diplomat from South Africa. I mean, an Israeli, but he speaks with this beautiful British accent. But since then, there's more material that has come out from archaeological digs. So all three of them, Heritage by Abba Ibn, Civilization and the Jews. I don't remember Simon Schama's name, the name of the what do you call it? The documentary. All of them are on YouTube now. You don't have to buy it. But back to what I was trying to say. If you see in Israel, the Western Wall, the Mountain of Masada, what's another great antiquity? The Tomb of Rachel. My goodness, the Tomb of Rachel is right there in Bethlehem. And all these things are there, all these. So the only problem is, like I said, we don't have the ability to go all the way back. But us archaeologists are obsessed with it. I was on a kibbutz called Kibbutz Gezer in the northern Negev. So it's quite, middle. And right nearby was a tell. A tell is, what is a tell? Like Tel Aviv. A tell is a city or a space that has destruction at another layer and another layer and another layer. It's like if you could go to Los Angeles and say, oh, there's Los Angeles in 1935. You can see these things in a big city today, but in Israel, things literally were destroyed and then built on top of. Same thing in Greece, So what they're trying to do is, dig deeper, and it becomes political without getting into that. Because, if you want to see what an area looked like and it's in the middle of the West Bank or Iraq, you got to, it works hard to do. Okay, so to sum up, we are a civilization that evolved from being a monolatristic, we got one God, they got one God, but our God is better, to a monotheistic, our God is the God of the world. And that's part of our journey. Isn't that cool? Kind of interesting. So I will see everybody next week, and happy Thanksgiving in advance. And what else can I tell you? What else is exciting and new? Joe, are you feeling well these days?
Feeling great.
This guy's 90 something. I won't even say any more than that. All right. 92. Okay. All right.
Okay, Rabbi, when they say you're digging the book, The Source, I think it's by Mitch's book. That was, I've read it twice. I just love it. The way he goes through and goes back and forth, and That is
That's
a
right.
really interesting book about the
Yep.
different layers.
Yep. In its time, it was, I mean, it's still a great book, but in its time, because what he bases it on is what they knew at the time of the archaeological digs. And then, I sort of saw like, isn't that right? It's like, here's a person in the 1940s, and then they do a flashback to what it was like in its actual time.
Right. It goes
oh.
back and forth
Yeah,
between
yeah, cool.
the ancient times and the modern times.
Yeah, yeah. I'll see if I can put together a list of some books you can read that are historical novels of a sort. So all right, I think we're almost out of time. We are 8:33. Oh, and we lost Taylor in the middle there, but all right. Bless you all. Thank you for your confidence in me, and I hope I didn't talk your ear off. All right. See you guys soon.
Thanks, Rabbi.
All right. Blessings.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Bye.
Debbie.